Good morning, boys. Today we're going to start with term 2 poetry, and today's poem is called My Name by Magoleng Wasilipe. So I'm expecting you to listen. Some of what I'm saying is going to be important for you to write down, and also what is on the slides is going to be important for you to write down. So you are more than welcome to pause this video so that you can write down your notes and then carry on as we're going along. It's completely up to you. So just a bit of background about this poem. It basically deals with Africans and how they are named, how they have come to be named now. From 1652 onwards, when Europeans first settled in South Africa, colonial rule had major impacts on the way that South Africans were allowed to express their identities, including the power of naming. Laws and violence limited freedom and opportunities for Black South Africans and shaped even what they were able to call themselves and what other people called them. Sometimes the motivation behind this was purely the inability of white South Africans to pronounce the names of Black South Africans. And even as I'm reading this, I think of myself. When I was in grade 5, I changed schools. I went to a new Model C school. And when I introduced myself on the first day, my teacher said, and I'll never forget these words. She said to me, "Ugh, that's too long. I'm never going to remember that." And she gave me a shorter version of my name, sort of the first 4 letters of my full name. And that's how I've always been known by people. And that's how I always introduced myself until recently. That's how I always introduced myself to people. All because of that teacher in 1996 who told me that my name was too long. She would never remember it. And she gave me a shorter name. So this is a very common thing, and it is something that's happening as recently as now, it seems. And so this poem deals with exactly that, how we as Africans are named. So I thought that I really enjoyed this poem, and I thought that I would have a look at some real life examples. So I thought I'd look at my example of a name, my name, as well as Mr. Ngema's name. So African children, generally, their names are, and someone said this, a friend of mine said this to me, that our names are our stories. Our names tell us how we came about. It tells us a little bit about our family history, how we were actually born, and the situation maybe in our family that we were born into. And another friend of mine said to me that our names are our commission. It is what we have been sent into the world to be. So our names aren't just what we are called for the sake of being called, so that you can be referred to as something. Our names are actually our stories. Okay. So if I look at Mr. Ngema's name, Mr. Ngema's name is Sanele, and it's Zulu, but I know in Xhosa, Sanele means we are enough. Okay, there are enough of us. So usually that kind of name, Sanele, would be given to maybe the last born of the family, which means that there are enough kids now. We've had enough kids. Let's not have any more kids. But it could also mean that we are satisfied. So the child that we have had, we feel content and we feel happy about having this particular child. And Mr. Ngema was telling me that he suspects that his name means that when he was born, his family, his mother was content and his mother was satisfied with the child that she got. And if we move on to my name, so my full name is Noloyiso. And I'm sure you know Loyiso Bala and you know Loyiso Gola, the comedian. And so they are like the male version of my name. Loyiso means victory, or it means triumph. And Noloyiso is to have victory or to have triumph. And the story behind my name is that my parents had 2 boys before I was born. They had 2 little boys, and my parents wanted a little girl. So they wanted to sort of complete the family and have a little girl. And so I was the most planned baby out of all my siblings. And when my parents planned me, they decided to have a little girl, and my mom got pregnant. And of course, you know, you can't decide to have a girl and have a girl. So my mom got pregnant, and then she had me, and I was a girl, and so that's why they named me victorious, or they said that I have victory because I was exactly what they wanted me to be. And so as you can see through these two examples, these are just two examples of so many names and so many different tribes and cultures. Because so just to make my point that our names are our stories, and it is what we are sent into the world to be, and what we are expected to be when we go into the world. So just a little bit about the poem. Okay, so the whole point of the poem is actually to make fun of how white people are unable to pronounce Xhosa names. So this particular name in this particular poem is a Xhosa name, and so you are going to find a lot of clicks in this name. And so our poet and our speaker is actually making fun of the fact that white people can't pronounce Xhosa names. Okay, and as much as she is making fun of that fact and she's making light of it, there is an air of resentment. So she is a little bit angry about it. She does have a little bit of a chip on her shoulder about it because what white people did historically, what white people did is that if they couldn't pronounce your name, just like my name, they would either shorten it or they'd give you another name completely. They'd give you like an English name or a biblical name completely. And she resents this because more often than not, they only did that because they couldn't pronounce your name. They didn't know how to say your name. So they were like, ah, I'll just call you Grootboom. Ah, I'll just call you like something else. Okay. Um, just an interesting fact, if you look at the Cape Malays, apparently they were named according to the month that they landed in South Africa on ships. So they would be called September because they arrived in September. So their surnames will be September, or they'll be October or June or whatever. And that was the month that they came in. So do you see how their names were disregarded? Their names weren't important. They were given another name, which was another completely different context of where they come from. And also, when Xhosa people went into the Navy, if they couldn't pronounce your name, if there were too many clicks or too many like words that they couldn't pronounce, they would call you matrus. And a matrus is an Afrikaans word for the Navy. So, and they covered it up by saying it is a sense of pride to be called matrus because it means that you were in the military, you were in the Navy. So it's something to be proud of. But what they really did was take away their real names and gave them another name with a different context, with a different story. They gave them a different story. Um, okay. All right. So let's read the poem together. You're gonna have this attached as a Google document, so you can print it if you like, so that you can read it for yourself. I'm just gonna go to the link. Okay. So the poem goes something like this. I'm hoping that this changed to this slide. Okay, but the poem goes like this. Nomgqibelo ncamisile mcebisa. Look what they have done to my name, the wonderful name of my great-great-grandmothers. Nomgqibelo ncamisile mcebisa. The burly bureaucrat was surprised. What he heard was music to his ears. Wat is daai? Sê nou weer. I am from Chief Daluxolo Velai Godle of Emampondweni, and my name is Nomgqibelo Ncamisile Mqhibisa. Messiah, help me. My name is so simple and yet so meaningful. But to this man, it is trash. He gives me a name, convenient enough to answer his whim. I end up being Maria. I, Nomgqibelo Ncamisile Mqhibisa. So that's the poem. If my slide didn't go to this one, don't worry. You will get an attachment of the poem that you can read while I'm reading it, or you can pause this video and go through the poem on your own. So let's have a look at the first stanza. So we can see So in the opening stanza, our speaker says, "Look what they've done to my name." Um, and it here already she introduces the fact that they cannot pronounce her name, right? But to be fair, actually, if you're not Xhosa speaking or Nguni speaking, it is actually very difficult to pronounce her name. And so it's kind of understandable that it is difficult to pronounce Xhosa names, and they take a bit of practice, but we get there. You'll see in this particular poem they use three clicks, which are Xhosa clicks, and it's the GQ click, which is the ga nomgqibelo, the C click, which is, and the QH click, which is ha. Now, when you add an H, just a fun fact, when you add an H next to any word in the Xhosa language, you actually soften it. So if there's no H next to the T, it becomes a da. But if you add an H next to a T, for example, then it becomes ta, becomes like a soft ta. So that's how you can differentiate between the two. So you can tell also that our speaker loves her name. She absolutely loves her name, the way that I love my name as well, because she refers to her name as wonderful. Okay. Um, People who are not Xhosa speaking are often taken aback by the clicks used in Xhosa names. And that's apparent where the burly bureaucrat is actually surprised when he hears this word. Sometimes as a teacher, when I get really angry at a class, sometimes I start speaking Xhosa. And especially in Johannesburg, the first reaction is, yo, what did you say? So people often, when you speak Xhosa, because of the clicks and because of the harshness of the tone of the language, people are usually very, very shocked. And so this bureaucrat is also the same. He hears all these clicks and he's like, "Yo, how do you say that? How do you pronounce that?" But it seems that she thinks that even though Xhosa names are difficult to pronounce and people get overwhelmed about pronouncing Xhosa names, the speaker, I think, believes that it's the Xhosa language or Xhosa names sound beautiful to anyone who hears them, and that's apparent in that line where she says "music to his ears." So her name sounded like music to the bureaucrat's name, to the bureaucrat's ears, which means if something sounds like music, it sounds beautiful, right? So even people who don't know how to say her name, they think that the clicks sound absolutely beautiful. So according to the speaker, the bureaucrat, as much as he is surprised by all the clicks in her name, he is also like, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful. Mm. Yeah. Um, so something that you'll notice in the first stanza is that the poet repeats her name three times in the first stanza alone, and she repeats it four times in the poem in its entirety. And I think that kind of repetition is not only so that we can hear her name over and over. But I think what she's also trying to do is that she's trying to emphasize that you need to practice. Like, yes, it's very difficult to pronounce Xhosa names, but it's very important to practice how to pronounce Xhosa names. There are some boys in my own class who have Italian names or European names that are difficult for me to pronounce, and I've had to practice them even though sometimes the boys will say, "Oh no, it's fine. You can just call me whatever," and they give me like a shorter version of their name. Um, but I think it's important, not just with Xhosa names, but also with other names. I think it's important to practice them. Yes, it's hard. It's not easy. But as my music instructor used to say, my singing instructor used to say, practice makes permanence, which means the more you practice something, the more it becomes permanent in your mind. It's not perfect, but it becomes better the more you practice it. And that's become a very strong belief for me. And so I try as far as possible to practice and to learn. I don't always get it right, but I try to practice people's names as much as possible, and I make sure that I get them right because I would appreciate that with my name, that people would practice my name and get it right. So we can tell a lot, and also this doesn't just apply to Xhosa people as well only. It also applies to Europeans. Um, Like I just think of some of the people, some of the boys that are in my class. There are Italian boys in my class. There are Zimbabwean boys in my class. There's a Croatian boy in my class. There is an Indian boy in my class, and all their names look kind of strange and they look kind of different to me as a Xhosa person. And so it is my job to practice them and to learn them and to learn the history behind their names and why they are called um, what they are called. But immediately when you hear an Italian person's name, you kind of get, oh, okay, so you are Italian. If you hear a Zulu person's name, you're like, oh, okay, you are Zulu. If you hear a Zimbabwean name, then you can gather that this person is Zimbabwean. So we can tell a lot about a person's name from we can tell a lot about a person's history and where they come from, just their nationality, from their name already, just from their name. And you don't necessarily have to know every country in the world to know that, okay, this name is a little bit different. Okay. Right. So if we move on to stanza two and stanza three, um, so in stanza one, our poet believes that her name is beautiful and her name has a lot of history. And in stanza two and three, she believes that her name is meaningful. So first she says her name, and she says that her name is simple, and then she says it's meaningful. But I think what she means when she says it's simple, she doesn't mean that it's easy to pronounce. That's not what she means when she says it's simple. She's saying that the meaning is very simple. So if someone is Xhosa and they hear my name, they go, "Oh, so your name means victory. Okay, so your name is victory. Great." um, Mr. I think it's Mr. Maklina. I don't know his surname. I just know his name, Mr. Uyanda. His name is Uyanda, and I could already guess that maybe his name means that when he was born, they said that the home is growing, it's getting bigger, and so that's why they named him Uyanda. So his name is simple, but the meaning is so deep because it tells such an elaborate and it tells a longer story than just that one word. Okay. So, of course, she says, our speaker says that her name is simple, but it's meaningful to her. But to the bureaucrat, it doesn't mean anything. She says that, in fact, she says to him, her name is trash. And I think it's because, of course, when white people, even when I hear an Italian or an Indian name, when I hear it, I don't know immediately what that name means. So technically, to me, those names don't mean anything to me either. So in the same way, to Europeans, when they hear someone's name, that name doesn't mean anything to them. Um, and so that's why the poet here is saying that to the bureaucrat, her name is trash. It doesn't mean anything, it's meaningless. Okay. And then on top of that, he doesn't know how to pronounce her name. Um, so, so what does the bureaucrat do as a solution? Instead of learning her name, learning how to pronounce it and practicing it over and over because practice makes permanence, he gives her another name, and this name means nothing. It has nothing to do with what her name actually means, and it has nothing to do with where her name comes from. In stanza one, she not only gives us her name, she also says that it was a great grandmother's name or great grandmother's name. And she also says that she comes from a certain clan. So our name tells us also where we come from, in the same way that my name tells me I'm Xhosa. So people will assume I come from the Eastern Cape or the Western Cape because of my name. Okay. Oh, I spelt new wrong here. This new name has no meaning and it has no context. So he calls her Maria. And he's really just oh, it's just easier to say your name. Let's just call you Maria. I feel like calling you Maria, that's what we're going to call you. Okay. So, and here's where she's emphasizing the fact that white South Africans will hear a name and they won't even try, they won't even practice. They'll just go, "Ah, I'll never remember that. I'll never learn how to pronounce that. So I'm just gonna call you something else because that's just gonna be easier." Okay. So that is the last slide. That is just a basic overview of the poem. There will be an attachment of the poem itself, a Google Doc of the poem itself. If you scroll down to the bottom of the poem, there are questions for you just to fill in and to complete by the end of the period or when your teacher says that you must complete them. And there will be a memo also given to your teacher so you guys can go through the answers and just discuss a bit of this poem. I hope that this was helpful and I hope that it gave you sort of an in depth understanding of names in general. Thank you.